So the opening of Parliament under the 7th administration takes place today. President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to outline key priorities and policies of the new administration. So what can we expect from the president's address later today? Let's now discuss this further with independent consultant, Dr. Raenette Gottardo. Dr. Gottardo, a very good morning to you and happy International Nelson Mandela Day to you.
Thank you so much, and also to you and to all the South Africans who are present this morning at this early hour.
Yeah, and speaking about Nelson Mandela and the speech that the president is expected to deliver today, considering that it has almost taken about close to what? The elections were on May the 29th and we are about to go to July the 29th. It's nearly about what? 2 months since the elections took place, and only now do we have the opening of Parliament. And I guess it also speaks to the difficult waters that the president will have to navigate. What sort of speech should he be delivering today?
It certainly speaks to the complex dynamic that is at play. I think he should try and deliver a kind of speech that unlocks some of the emotion and resonance of the Mandela era, even though it is very difficult to do in the current circumstances where there's obviously a whole new set of players in government and a whole new set of players on opposition benches and a whole different dynamic, therefore. I think it is important to unlock some of the sentiments of a different period, mindful of the fact that we are not in, a simple GNU arrangement. This is a complex grand coalition which we're dealing with, and the dynamic is therefore completely different. But the emotive iconography of a different time, where South Africans did come together in different forms to rebuild a new society through new laws in the first and second democratic parliament, is not dissimilar to the scale of the task ahead.
Yeah, and when we look at that speech that the president first delivered, his first State of the Nation address in 2018, the so-called Tumamina speech, and I remember how even from the opposition benches, they stood up and they applauded the president. And I wonder if you'd be able to evoke that same sense of pride, but also that sense of unity that is required as we navigate these difficult waters, uncharted waters.
Well, as they say, a week is a long time in politics, 2 months is an eternity. So I think that what has happened is the reality of technically an electoral loss. The ANC did become the majority party yet again, but at 40% of the vote. So the circumstances under which that will try to come to the fore are very, very different circumstances. I'm not privy to the inner dynamic in the cabinet Lekgotla of the past weekend, but if one reads the press reports, it seems that there's a positive sentiment of unity in the cabinet, but that unity will certainly be tested by a different climate on the opposition benches that are tacking leftward, more strongly leftward than before, and more strongly populist than before. So the tonality will be key. And the tonality will also be key in terms of the response from opposition benches that are now completely reconfigured and completely different. Yeah,
what the GNU has done, if we look, for instance, at the budget votes that have been taking place, is that it has made it much easier to get some of these budgets, get the votes through and get the majority of political parties in Parliament to vote in favour of these budgets. And that's, of course, you have 11 political parties that are part of the GNU. What does this mean then for oversight, as well as considering the so-called progressive caucus in Parliament, which the MK party as well as the EFF is part of?
I think there are two different dynamics to look out for. Two of the most important committees in Parliament are chaired by two gentlemen who will have an enormous burden of responsibility on their shoulders for oversight and accountability. One is Songezo Zibi of Rise Mzansi in Scopa. The other is Musi Maimane of Bosa in the Appropriations Committee. These are two of the parliamentary committees where I have a fair amount of experience, and where really, if you look at where the oversight really tests the limits of the Constitution in sections 55 and 56 of the Constitution, those are the two committees that really, really fundamentally matter. So these two gentlemen will have an enormous, enormous responsibility in that regard. The budget vote debates in the smaller plenaries have been a small appetizer of the tonality that one can possibly expect today. And I think the challenge will be to see how the new leftward forces on the opposition benches will handle the new reality of the grand coalition.
And that's the thing about it. The nub around it is, does the president enter Parliament today and delivering his speech today more confident and with some sort of a guarantee that he will finish his 5 years in office, considering on the other end that you have John Steenhuisen, who said yesterday that when it comes to Pata, for instance, the DA is unlikely to support a no confidence motion in President Cyril Ramaphosa. But also, once again, what that means for the constituency of the Democratic Alliance that have always argued that wrongdoers must be held accountable.
You see, as I said, a week is a long term in politics. The reality here is that both political parties that are the key players in the new governance arrangement, so the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, will have to see how these new dynamics play into their own parties. Because, unity of purpose is not fundamentally guaranteed in a political party. Political parties are living, breathing organisms, and they respond to events and electoral time cycles and internal party political leadership changes. So these are the dynamics that will remain on the table, and these are the dynamics that will be in the background of the new governance dynamic.
And it trickling down, of course, to the provincial as well as the local government levels. And speaking about local government, we will be heading to local government elections. And again, with that said, I don't know if you're able to look into your crystal ball and see how political parties, especially the ones that are part of the government of national unity, will be able to navigate a message to their constituencies directly to still say that, still have confidence in us, even though we are part of a government of national unity at a national level.
You see, the political scientist in me, not the former politician, would reply to that and say that the dynamic of an electoral process often tends to reveal inner fractures in political parties. And I think this is the fundamental trade-off that the political parties would have considered extremely carefully before they entered the new governance arrangements, because they are quite aware of the new electoral dynamic. So what could realistically happen is a complete potential realignment of the political forces into a more centrist organization and more leftward forces. And that will be in the dynamic of how the internal pressures play out in both political parties in the next 16 to 18 months.
Yeah, part of the ANC's constituency, of course, is also the working class being represented by unions that are part of the COSATU Federation, which is an alliance with the ANC. The SACP, an alliance partner of the ANC, of course, not happy with the decision that has been taken by the party, saying that it was essentially a sell-out position that was taken. But what does this mean for Labour and also Labour's ability to influence decisions that are taken by the executive? The NHI bill is a contentious issue, which the president has now signed into law. The Bella bill, which the basic education minister, who's from the DA, Sivuyo Kwahube, is saying that it must be sent back to the National Assembly.
I think there will be two dynamics that will come to the fore. The one is the extent to which some of this new legislation tests some of the actual constitutional provisions themselves. I mean, the Constitution was very clear on some of the concurrent powers, on health, on education, on a variety of other areas. And it'll bring some of those pressure points more clearly to the fore. And I think what it will also serve to do is to, bring a different dynamism to the conversations. If you're going to be seating COSATU and DA members around the table where DA members are now members of a governing arrangement, the dynamic in the room changes. So it's going to force perhaps more introspective conversations. One could hope that it would force more introspective conversations where people will test one another's assumptions on policy positions and potentially explore whether those assumptions hold and whether those policy positions are quite as far apart as they assume they are.
Yeah. Finally, do you think that the nature of a coalition of this kind at a national level has the potential to even influence the ideological standing of a political party, whether it is the ANC, whether it is the Democratic Alliance, whether it is the Freedom Front Plus? As an example, most of people who have been arguing against the ANC going into the coalition were saying that the ANC will become a neoliberal political party, meaning that the ANC essentially is weaker within the GNU and much more susceptible to being influenced. Is that how you see it as well?
think if one looks at particularly the economic policy positions of the ANC, even at the time that I was a parliamentarian, there were very strong neoliberal tendencies in public policy in the economic sphere. So this is not a new debate. It's certainly not a new debate. And one of the famous adages of, walking left and talking right or vice versa was a very important part of this conversation already 20 years ago. So what is going to be a completely new dynamic is how the daily interactions within the new grand coalition is going to expose or explore the depth of ideological difference or the absence of a depth of ideological difference. And as I say, that is going to fundamentally challenge people's assumptions. And including, in the basket of assumptions, it's going to challenge voters' assumptions on their respective ideological homes and their various political homes. This is an entirely new dynamic, which has the potential to create wide-ranging political realignment. It's early days to say that, but the dynamism of what this will unleash within the political parties has the potential to force broader realignments in the body politic and broader conversations on deep ideological differences or the absence of deep ideological differences.
Dr. Gottardo, thank you so much for your time. That is independent consultant Dr. Raenette Gottardo. And remember that the President will be opening a Parliament at around 7 o'clock later this evening. We will carry his speech live here on Channel 405.